Okay, so when I say the name George Washington Carver, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most people, probably for you too, it's one thing. Just one.
Right? He's the peanut man, the guy who famously came up with hundreds of different uses for a single legume. We've all heard that story. But that's not even close to the whole story.
Yeah, what if the whole peanut thing was just the tip of the iceberg? What if that catchy nickname is actually covering up a story that's way more complex and way more fascinating? A story about a systems thinker, a humanitarian, and a man whose own life is, believe it or not, a huge historical mystery.
I mean, just look at this list. It completely blows that Peanut Man idea out of the water. We're talking about plastics, synthetic rubber, adhesives, even instant coffee and paint. This guy wasn't just some botanist messing around with plants. He was a legit, brilliant industrial chemist turning everyday props into some seriously amazing stuff.
Okay, but to really get why he did all this, you've got to understand his mission. His genius wasn't just about inventing cool things for the heck of it. No, he was trying to solve a massive, massive crisis.
So picture this. It's the early 1900s, and the entire Southern economy is basically built on one thing, cotton. And then along comes this tiny little bug, the boll weevil, and it's threatening to wipe out everything. We're talking total economic collapse, especially for poor black farmers. That was the problem George Washington Carver was staring down. And this is where his true genius really shines. He didn't just say, hey, plant something else. No, he built an entire system. He taught farmers to rotate their crops, telling them to plant soil-enriching things like peanuts. But then, of course, that creates a new problem, right? Suddenly you've got mountains of peanuts and nobody to buy them. He realized he had to create a market from scratch. So he got in the lab at the Tuskegee Institute and he just invented and kept on inventing. We're talking over 300 products from peanuts alone, and more than 100 from sweet potatoes. This wasn't just science for science's sake. This was economic life support. He was single-handedly creating demand for the very crops that were saving the farms.
And that really gets to the heart of it. It was never, ever just about the peanut. It was about the people. He was using his incredible mind to empower the poorest farmers, to give them a way to survive that didn't depend on the volatile cotton market. Okay, so now we're starting to see the real man, right? The guy behind the Peanut Man myth. But this is where the story takes a really weird turn. You'd think for someone this famous, we'd know everything about him. But it turns out some of the most basic facts about his life are a complete mystery. I love this quote from a National Park Service historian back in 1958. He called it a vexatious research problem. Vexatious. It basically means it was a huge, frustrating headache. Decades after Carver died, people trying to piece together his life story were just stuck. They were tangled up in all these contradictions, starting with the one thing you'd think would be simple, his birthday. So let's break this down. You've got the 1870 census, a pretty big deal for historians, and it suggests he was born in 1860. Okay. But then later in his life, once he was famous, Carver himself said it was more like 1864. But get this, as a young man, he consistently, over and over again, said his birth year was 1865. So what gives? Which one is right?
You can see why the historians trying to figure this out had such a tough time. It was like a perfect storm of problems. First, Carver was a very private man. Second, and this is huge, he was born into slavery, a time and a system where official records for enslaved people just weren't kept. And to top it all off, the stories people told about him, even his friends, didn't always line up.
And if that wasn't confusing enough, the mess gets even bigger when you look at the people who were actually trying to write his life story. You basically had a battle of the biographers, and they painted two totally different portraits of the man. So in one corner, you have Rackham Holt. Her book was considered the official biography, but in the other corner, you have a researcher named Ethel Edwards, who basically called Holt's book a work of fiction, a myth. Edwards based her work on more than 300 of Carver's personal letters, and she even claimed that Holt hardly ever interviewed Carver directly. With that kind of disagreement, how are you supposed to know what's true? But all this brings us back to the big question, right? Why did Carver himself tell different stories? Why stick with 1865 for his entire youth and then change it to 1864 when he was older?
Because when you actually look at the paper trail from his early days, the evidence for 1865 is just rock solid. We're talking homesteading papers where he lists his age, his college yearbook, which straight up says born in 1865, even a note he wrote himself where he says he was about 2 weeks old when the war closed. Everything points to 1865. It really seems like that's the date he believed was true for most of his life.
And this is really where his story becomes so much bigger than just him. His case shines a giant spotlight on this huge problem for historians. For millions of African Americans who are born into slavery, the basic documents of a life, a birth certificate, a census record, they just don't exist. It's a powerful and tragic irony, isn't it? The very system he fought his entire life to overcome is the same system that tried to erase the very fact of his existence from the record books.
So, when you really think about it, whether he was born in 1860, 64, or 65, it doesn't really change the incredible impact he had on the world. What it does is add another layer to his story. It's this powerful reminder that his incredible journey started in a world that literally did not care enough to even write down when he was born.
Think about this number for a second. $125. That was his monthly salary. This is a man who got job offers from Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, offers that would have made him incredibly wealthy. But he turned them all down. He stayed at Tuskegee because he wanted to serve the farmers who needed him the most. It just shows you his life was never about the money.
And then, at the end of his life, every penny he had managed to save, around $30,000, he gave it all away. He put it right back into the cause, creating a foundation to make sure that his work, the work of helping farmers and unlocking the secrets of nature, would keep going long after he was gone.
So when we talk about his legacy, yeah, the 300 uses for the peanut is part of it. But that's not the real legacy. The real legacy is the example he set. It's the story of a brilliant, brilliant mind born into the worst possible circumstances, who dedicated every single day of his life to helping other people, to lifting them up. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? We almost lost the true story of George Washington Carver, buried under myths and missing records. It really makes you stop and wonder, whose stories didn't we find? How many other tales of incredible genius, of resilience, of service, have just been lost to time, completely untold?